Our Mountain West week continues as we take a deep dive into the Fresno Bulldogs.
College football is back, and we're back on the Big Mountain with a very special guest.
Hey, we are continuing our Mountain West preview week. We did one for Boise State, we did one for Wyoming, and we got to do one for the Bulldogs out at Fresno. I have them pretty high up on my list. I'm going to get that out tomorrow with our Mountain West preview. But we have a special guest with us again. This is Gabe Camarillo. He is with Fox 26 in Fresno, the sports anchor and reporter there. So we want to say welcome to the Big Mountain.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. What a weird Mountain West it is because a lot of guys are coming back from last year. So it's almost going to maybe be a repeat run of 2023. Bulldogs hope not, because obviously last year didn't go as well for them at the end as it did for them in the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. A little surprised where things ended up with Fresno at 4-4 in the Mountain West. I have higher expectations for them this year. I think pretty much all the Bulldogs fans do as well. So let's get into that. Let's talk about expectations for this year. I mean, where are you at with the team as a whole? And then we'll dive into, some of the specific players and things here in a bit. But what are your overall expectations for the Bulldogs this year?
Well, expectations have always been to win a Mountain West championship in Fresno. I think that goes back to when in the 80s and 90s, they were consistently winning the Pacific Coast Athletic Association conference titles. And, Jim Sweeney teams, Pat Hill teams, they've always saw the conference championship as the end goal. That hasn't changed under Jeff Tedford and hasn't changed under interim coach Tim Skipper. So the expectation is to win a conference title or to, at the very least, be in the mix in November like they were last year. And like last year, they had quarterback Mikey Keene, they had running back Malik Sherrod, had a lot of returning offensive weapons. So I feel like the expectation could also be to have one of the top three offenses in the conference. You look at other high-octane offenses like UNLV and Boise State and Fresno. What do they have in common? Returning quarterbacks. Now, I know UNLV had that Jaden Maeva guy who is he at Georgia? Is he at USC? I kind of lost track there for a moment. They have Doug Brimfield still, and Boise State still has Maddox Madsen. But honestly, my money would be on Mikey Keene. If I had to pick one of the three quarterbacks between Fresno, Boise, and UNLV, I would pick Mikey Keene because only one of those guys went into Big Ten country and threw for over 360 yards and 4 touchdowns for a win. That was Mikey in his debut. So my last expectation would be for Mikey Keene to have, I guess you could say, second-year surge. The sophomore slump's a myth. The second-year surge is a thing. It was a thing for Jake Haener, and I think it could be another thing for Mikey Keene.
Love it. Well, I got to follow up on Mikey Keene here because we are huge fans of Mikey Keene. Yep. We saw him early on. You mentioned his debut there for the Bulldogs last year. Opened a lot of eyes, opened our eyes. We had high expectations, but man, that first coming out party for him was humongous. And we do have high expectations. You look at the preseason polls, he's typically the number one quarterback. I know there's some arguments there as he 1, 2, or 3, but I think he's number one. And there's a strong 2 and 3 there behind him. But seeing what he did last year, what I think he can continue to do and having that surge, as you said, I like that. My only real question for him is health, because he did have a little bit of some health issues last year. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball. You don't know if people are going to get injured or anything like that. I think if he's healthy and he's able to play the full year, nobody's 100% healthy, but able to play every game, no reason why this guy is not the number one quarterback in the Mountain West. And when you have that sort of just confidence behind center, it gives the whole team confidence. And I'm with you of everybody you see here. When you look at Boise, they got the kind of the fight right now between Madsen and the new guy, Nelson, coming from USC. They don't know who the starter is yet. 2 talented guys, but they don't know who it is. And then, like you said, Maeva left. Georgia, USC ends up at USC. And yeah, they do bring in Sluka from Holy Cross. But man, when you look at who those 3 teams have coming back, bar none, Mikey Keene's the guy that you want. How are you feeling about health? How's he feeling right now? Is he ready to pretty much 100% ready to go for the season?
Yeah, he definitely is. And he said that he's added some muscle over the offseason. He's changed his nutrition plan a bit, so that way he can withstand the 12-game slog. I think the big test for fans, at least, to see Mikey Keene's durability is how he holds up after the game against Michigan. Because You're going up against Mason Graham. You're going up against these huge defensive linemen from Michigan, and the linebackers hit just as hard, if not harder. I want to see how Mikey Keene looks after that game, because if he survives that Michigan game, well, then he's going to survive the next 11, because there's no one harder on Fresno State's schedule than obviously the defending national champions.
For sure. Well, you got to have somebody to throw to here. I want to talk about the receivers. So let's talk about receivers. Then I'm going to throw it to Steve. I know he has a couple questions, I think, about coaching and maybe that Michigan game as well. But let me talk about the receivers here real quick. Everybody knows Brooks left. And he was a fan favorite, fantastic. Gill is gone as well. But I'll tell you what, you look at the last year's freshman that's returning, his numbers were just about as good as what Brooks were. I think he is going to be a superstar for the Bulldogs. But talk about that room, kind of who's their top 3 or 4 receivers? Who do you see stepping up to fill some of those holes this year?
Well, the most experienced 3 coming back, you have to look at Jalen Moss, Josiah Freeman, and of course, Magdalena, who I think is this year's fan favorite just because he is one of those, classic slot guys, works hard. Maybe you might underestimate him. You better not do that because he will burn you. He'll run right past you. Maybe one of the fastest guys on this team, along with Jalen Moss. Magdalena is going to get open on 3rd down. Jalen Moss will get open on any down. In fact, if I had to pick a guy who had the most big play ability in the receiver room, it was probably Moss. I mean, I'm thinking about at Wyoming, he had a big play, a slant that looks like your average 10-yard gain. He gets the extra 30 or 40 yards with his speed, his run after catch. And then Josiah Freeman, who I saw him get more snaps as the year got along into October and November. And I was talking to offensive coordinator Pat McCann about that. It's because he got more confident and he got more of a feel for the playbook. He became more of a threat for defensive backs because of his size. He can just go up and get him at 6'3" tall. He is probably one of your bigger red zone threats, especially without Trey Watson, who transferred to Texas A&M from Fresno State. He was your red zone guy last year. I think that title belongs to Josiah Freeman, or maybe the new tight end Cam Beecham, who's having a good fall camp so far.
I've heard some good things there about that new tight end as well. So let's take a little bit of a sidestep here. We talked about some players. Steve is our Big Ten guy, and I know we're both really excited for week 1 here. Steve, why don't you take it away here with Michigan? What do we got going on?
A couple questions ago, you my ears perked up. You mentioned that Michigan game, so I'm excited to ask you this question. Here's the thing: my focus is on the Big Ten. JY focuses on the Mountain West. I think I've been following what's going on with Michigan very closely. They're coming off of that college football playoff championship. Couple very physical seasons in a row where they got to the mountaintop. But there's been these, they're kind of rebuilding. They have a new head coach. There's been some off-season, off the field scandals. I think this is a great opportunity, for Fresno to come into a big house with a Michigan team that I'm not going to say they're in shambles, but maybe they have their focus is on some different areas. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. So from your perspective, being the local reporter there covering Fresno, what is the perspective on that end? Are the fans and the team, are they looking forward to this game as a great opportunity, or are they just trying to kind of get in there, get their paycheck, get out healthy?
Well, I would say obviously Fresno State has the advantage when it comes to returning experience because Michigan doesn't have a returning quarterback, whereas the Bulldogs do. Returning running game. I'm excited to see what Michigan can bring with it's Donovan Edwards, right? The returning running back for the Wolverines.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So he had him coming back. I think when it comes to Michigan scouting Fresno State, they got a lot of film, whereas Fresno State doesn't have any footage of, is it Alex Orji as the starting quarterback? And maybe that's still a position battle for the Wolverines. You see, there's
he should be the starter.
Question marks that Michigan has. Say that again?
I was just confirming. Yes, he should be the starter.
Yeah. So, I think Fresno State might be behind the 8 ball in terms of scouting who the Wolverines would run out. But outside of, X's and O's and game planning, this is a great opportunity for the Bulldogs because, as you mentioned, NBC, 4:30 p.m. That's prime time here on the East Coast and the West Coast. It's going to be a great time slot for Fresno State to get that exposure. And it's kind of reminiscent of some of the early games that Fresno State played in decades past when they would go to Oklahoma, they would go to LSU, they would go to Tennessee. This feels like one of those games. And in those games, especially the game at USC in 05, they were in it deep into the second half. Do I expect something similar this year? I guess it kind of depends on how the game starts. I'll tell you this. If Fresno State manages to get a couple stops in the first quarter or get a score in the first quarter, even if it's not a lead, if they just are in that game in the first half, they can start believing in themselves. And that's probably the biggest thing. If this Fresno State team is confident after the way last year ended, it's going to be hard to stop them.
Awesome. I love it. I love the answer. And again, I'm really excited for Fresno. I think this is for Fresno State Bulldogs. I think it's a great opportunity for them. Kind of leads me into the next question. We talked about Michigan having a coaching turnover. As I'm sure certainly aware and been following very closely with Coach Tedford having to, he stepped away multiple times, but it seems like this is going to be it. He steps away. I'm sure that was not a massive surprise to the staff, to the players, and to the local reporters covering. So what's the vibe right now? What do you think the impact of Coach Tedford stepping away is going to have on this season?
I would say little impact. I wouldn't say it was a major impact because this team has already had game prep under Tim Skipper. Keep in mind, he also stepped away, Tedford did, before the New Mexico Bowl. And so there was those 2 weeks where Skipper was running practice, was putting together the game plan for a New Mexico State team that, yeah, sure, right. Big Ten guys will say New Mexico State, that's an easy win. Not last year when they went 10-4 and beat Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium, and they were playing like to win because, the New Mexico Bowl is the closest bowl to Las Cruces. They were playing to win that game, and Fresno State stomped them 37-10. And that was with Tim Skipper as head coach. So I would say if not for that bowl win, yes, this is a major storyline. But when Tedford announced that he was officially stepping down and not just stepping away, yeah, it made the news cycle for a day or two. And then everyone kind of realized, Tim Skipper's done this before. It's not a huge deal that he's doing it now for 12 games. If anything, if he has a good season, this guy could keep the job long term. I think a lot of alumni would be on board with that. The players would be on board with that because Skipper's an energetic guy. He brings the juice. He brings the enthusiasm out of you. It's really hard to not smile when you're interviewing Tim Skipper because he's always smiling and he's always giving you great sound bites. So if he's giving the media great sound bites, imagine what he's telling to the players after each period of practice. I think the players are on board with this. At least the players that we've talked to have been on board with this. Mikey Keene, Malik Sherrod, the defensive guys, they're on board with Tim Skipper. And so it's not going to be a huge impact with Tedford stepping away. But obviously the experience of Tedford, the late game coaching acumen that Tedford had, that's not something that Skipper has. That's why they've already assigned what they call a game situation manager for Fresno State. That's longtime assistant head coach and special teams coach, John Baxter, who's done this decades now. He's been at USC, he's at Fresno State. He'll help Skipper manage those close late game situations. Sorry.
That's a really interesting and I think could be important points in their season.
Yeah, and Tedford's not one you can replace. I mean,
Right.
One of, for the past, I don't know how many, several decades, just one of the best coaches out on the West Coast that you can have in the different places he's been. So it's great to hear that, he's probably left the Bulldogs in a great spot with Skipper and, having some of these other types of things in place for that transition, but you can't replace a Tedford. He's just a special kind of guy. I did a ranking of all of the coaches in the Mountain West. He was my number 2, and you could certainly make him the number 1, most likely. I was struggling between 1 and 2. But yeah, just a great guy. I want to talk about Sherrod, and I want to talk about the running back since you brought that up. Again, another guy here, Sherrod, that is in that top 2 or 3. And of course, I think everybody can understand and knows that Genty is kind of the star running back of the Mountain West. But I've seen Sherrod here be that either 2 or 3 guy. Whaley with the Wyoming Cowboys is talked about in that 2 or 3 spot in terms of top running backs. What does that room look like? Who do you think is going to be the solid number 2? Because it can't just be one guy. You got to have a room of running backs here. So how are you feeling about the running back room?
I feel great because we saw Fresno State play Boise State, the eventual Mountain West champion in Fresno. And whereas Genty sat out with injury, Sherrod rushed for 134 yards on one of the best run defenses in the conference. Actually, not one of the best statistically at the time.
Yeah.
Run defense in the conference. He rushed for 134 against them and returned a kickoff for a touchdown right before halftime, which ended up being the final score, 37-30, without that kickoff return touchdown from Sherrod. the game's tied at the end of 4 quarters. Sherrod is the guy because of his versatility. I mean, I saw that he was named to the watch list for the Paul Hornung Award because he gets it done on punt returns, kick returns, and of course, running the ball in the backfield. So you feel good about him. He almost rushed for 1,000 yards. If not for his injury earlier in the year that took away about a game and a half of time for him, he would have rushed for 1,000. And so we have an entirely different conversation, I think, if we see a 1,000-yard rusher instead of a 976-yard rusher. I think Sherrod's going to maybe surprise some people if you're not paying attention to the Mountain West. But if you are, you know that he's, as you said, maybe a top 2 running back in the Mountain West. Now, behind him, when Sherrod got hurt, Elijah Gilliam stepped up and I think had 90-something rushing yards against the Purdue defense, had another good game against Eastern Washington. So I would say Elijah Gilliam's proven himself to be capable of filling in for Sherrod if he were to step aside. And then Devin Rivers, his older brother was Ronnie Rivers, who is a legend here in Fresno because he scored the game-winning touchdown in the conference championship game a couple years ago. The little brother is kind of looking like bigger brother. The coaches have told me that the running style is similar, the work ethic is similar. Wouldn't be surprised to see Devin Rivers get some major play this season.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to see that. And let's talk about the other side of the ball. We always like talking about offense and the star power of offense, but I think this defense could be something really special this year as well. Maybe in that talk of top 30, defenses in the country by the end of the season here. They returned 5 starters, so not a huge amount of returning starters, but they're deep. Good front line. Just overall, I don't mean to gloss over any names, but you can throw out as many as you like. Give us kind of where you're feeling this defense is at.
I think this defense is one of the most well-coached units in the country because of the assistant coaches. Kevin Coyle was an NFL defensive coordinator for many years. Jethro Franklin coached Khalil Mack in Oakland, coached Julius Peppers, coached all of these, future Hall of Famers, current Hall of Famers. Now he's the D-line coach at Fresno State. And then J.D. Williams, former first-round pick for the Buffalo Bills. He is the cornerbacks coach. And so even last year when injuries did bite this team, like Cam Lockridge going down after week 3, I saw Ezekiel Hamilton step in. And, he took his lumps early on, but by the end of the year, he was looking solid and has a lot of Bulldog fans excited to see him take that year 2 leap at cornerback. Linebacker-wise, I think that might be the strongest unit on this team because of the experience. They got Malachi Langley, former USC Trojan, CB Nomura, Tim Thomas, Tyler Mello. I can go on and on. I'm probably missing some guys. Oh, Phoenix Jackson, who had a great New Mexico Bowl performance. I would say the linebacker group is probably one of the strengths. And I say one of the strengths because the defensive line is looking really good with the experience. Again, Gabriel Lightfoot has been a starter his past 2 seasons. He started as a 17-year-old freshman. Now as a 19-year-old junior, he's looking to take the leap. You have Devo Bridges, who he can kind of play anywhere. He can play defensive tackle. He can play defensive end. I think he's probably going to play D-end opposite another former USC Trojan who could really make or break this defense with his performance, Corey Foreman. He could be like David Perales was 2 years ago when Fresno State won the conference. What Perales was, a consistent 3-down pass rushing threat. You would worry about him if you're a quarterback on 1st and 10, you worry about him on 2nd and 10, especially 3rd and long. When those passing situations, that's where David Perales was his most fierce. And if Corey Foreman was like it or is like that this season, he had the 5-star pedigree coming out of high school. If you can tap into that talent, that could lead Fresno State to be a championship caliber defense like they were 2 years ago when they stuffed Boise State. Taylor Green did not know what to do in that 2022 championship game facing Fresno State's defense. If Corey Foreman is that guy, I think they can do just like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you're talking about the linebackers, then I can't talk too highly about the linebackers because the D-line's so daggone good, and, you don't want to make any of the positions feel bad, but I agree.
The safeties, too, I want to mention real quick, Dean Clark and Cameron Braca both come back after starting multiple games last year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing them up too. We don't want to leave anybody out because a defensive unit it's the entire unit, Yeah, you have a couple of your playmakers that they'll get the sacks and they'll get certain things, but it is a full man front that has to, especially when you're playing in these big games, some of these high offenses, the Boise's, the UNLVs, yeah, it takes all men on the deck there to stop them. So, there's something else?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Gabe, I got a follow up for you here. So we've talked about, they got the returning quarterback. The coaching situation seems pretty well squared away. We've talked about the offense, the playmakers. We talked about the defense, and maybe going back to that championship level defense. I have a big picture question for you. Okay. So obviously a lot of changes in college football over the last couple of years. And this year, first year of the 12-team playoff, there's one guaranteed spot for a G5 program. So I just want to hear from you. You're boots on the ground there in Fresno. You're the local Fox affiliate reporter. Is that even a topic of discussion? Is there buzz around the program of, hey, if we can go through and win a Mountain West championship, we could possibly get into that college football playoff? Is that a goal of the team, or just even something that is there buzz about it?
I think if you ask individual players, like I talked to Malik Sherrod, and he mentioned that exact thing, maybe go to a college football playoff as a goal of his. They might tell you, yeah, that'd be great. I mean, that is on their pyramid, because they have a pyramid in the meeting room. The top of the pyramid is NY6. They do see that as the ultimate end goal, but one thing or another, it's really tough to go undefeated in college football. And if you're a G5 team, you almost have to go undefeated to earn that spot to go to a New Year's Six bowl. I think they take it 1 week at a time. If they were to go 11-1 and then win the Mountain West Championship to go 12-1, and their only losses to Michigan at Michigan, even if it's a blowout Michigan win, or especially if it's a close Michigan win, they'll probably end up in the conversation. All right. If they go 11-2, it gets tougher because the AAC is also a really good conference too when it comes to G5s. They could have a representative. I see that as not a main conversation yet, but it definitely will be if it's like last year where they're 8-1 and ranked in November, and they're in that conversation, then they'll have it. But until they're in it, I doubt they're going to really talk about it because it's so hard. The game is kind of stacked against G5s to win a national championship. It's been that way for a long time. I doubt it gets solved with this, format. I think we'll just see them lose because the facility discrepancy and the money discrepancy is still there. I think it's cool to have that door open for G5s, but I still think that the inequities in college football exist regardless of you giving them a spot in the CFP.
Yeah, for sure. Perfectly answered. I think it is the inequities just in terms of the broad scope of college football. 100% spot on. So, Gabe, we thank you so much for coming on. I love doing these deep dives because I love learning more about my Mountain West schools. I am the Mountain West cheerleader, as I've called myself here on the Big Mountain, and really appreciate you breaking down the Bulldogs for us.
That went by so fast. I'm surprised we're done. Thank you so much, guys.
Well, absolutely.
Well, hey, I have a favor to ask of you, okay? If Fresno State Bulldogs come into the big house and upset Michigan, okay, I want you to come back on the show the following Monday with us, okay? Maybe Sunday night we can record. Following Monday, come and break down the game for us. Are you willing to do that?
That will be the biggest win in Fresno State football history. I'm not even kidding you. I mean, they've had some big wins in the past. They had that win over USC in the Freedom Bowl in '92 when Trent Dilfer beat USC, who had Willie McGinnis at the time. They beat Oregon State with Oregon State being Sports Illustrated's pick to win the national championship. They almost beat USC. And I think that's what gives you hope is they almost beat Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush. And they had a really loaded, experienced roster back in '05. 19 years later, another defending national champion, a bit closer to the start of the season, but that's right where you want them. Like you said, guys, they are getting kind of a limping Michigan who can't stay out of the off-the-field headlines. I think the Bulldogs are looking to take advantage of that on the field. So we'll talk then, maybe.
Yeah, I got goosebumps.
I would say now we got to go watch the game right now. You have just laid it out there. Let's play the game.
Yeah.
So anyway, Gabe, hey, we thank you for coming on the mountain. And for those of you that like this, make sure you give this episode a like. Subscribe if you like our content. We do everything Mountain West, everything Big Ten, and we pick every Mountain West and Big Ten game. We're going to continue to do that throughout the season. Hey, we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.